What's happening, people? Welcome back to another episode of the Athletes to Athletes podcast. Today, I'm wrapping up my Black History Month conversations with former Maryland wrestler Jahi Jones, who is now the Executive Director of the HBCU Wrestling Initiative. Back in 2021, I got a call from world silver medalist Kerry McCoy, who first told me about the HBCU Wrestling Initiative and wanted me to connect with Jahi to help make the announcement that they will be bringing wrestling to the HBCU campus of Morgan State. Now, with things continuing to grow at Morgan State with Olympic gold medalist Kenny Monday in place as the head coach, I knew it was only right to catch up with Jahi again to see how things were going. So let's dig into the conversation with HBCU Wrestling's Executive Director Jahi Jones as he gives me insight on how things are going and what we can expect in the future. As always, I'm happy you're joining us for another episode of the A2A podcast, and I hope you enjoy today's conversation. So welcome back to the A2A podcast. Today, we are continuing our Black History Month conversations, and this will be the last conversation. And I certainly saved one of the best for last, as my man Jahi Jones is coming on with me today. And, you know, Jahi, this is a special conversation for me because I got to be a part of the first conversation to announce HBCU wrestling coming and things like that. And we got to have that conversation. So this is special for me to have you on the A2A podcast and catch up with you. But before we even get into that, I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, give a little bit of background about you.
Yeah. So, and Ryan, I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate the support early on with just getting the word out. It was right when we launched back in October in 21 when we had that podcast. And so it was just getting the program started. But in terms of who I am, I'm Jahi Jones, the Executive Director for the Historically Black Colleges and Universities Wrestling Initiative. And kind of we'll get into, what we do. But essentially, our goal and why we were founded is we wanted to be able to create the next generation of Black leaders, right? And by doing so, using wrestling as a vehicle to get there. Wrestling teaches, a bunch of different attributes that people can translate easier to the workforce or whatever career path that they may go. And that experience being paired with the HBCUs in their historical context, we believe that it would be able to be a great mix to continue to make sure that we're creating the next bench of Black leaders. Yeah.
So, obviously the last time we chatted, we talked about, you being at Maryland and wrestling at Maryland, but let's kind of dig a little bit into your sports background. How big have sports been for you? You just talked about all the things that wrestling teaches, and obviously you're a product of that,
Right.
So how big have sports been for you growing up, as a youngster to really shape and mold you into the person that you've become?
Yeah. So I guess I'll take it back to high school. So I started wrestling officially ninth grade. I was a ninth grader at Oxon Hill High School. I got into the sports with my brother. He tried out for wrestling. He's 3 years older than me. When he was a freshman, and he would come home and he learned a shot, right? And so he taught me a shot, but he didn't tell me that he learned a sprawl too. So he's like 40, 50 pounds heavier than me. So he teaches me a shot and tells me to shoot in on him. And I just remember shooting in on him. I just get splatted like as a little sixth grader trying to go against my brother. And I get splattered right onto the floor. So I start yelling and crazy, but I just wanted to start training. And we've always had that, wrestling around the house, right? These brothers, but started wrestling as a freshman in high school. And it was one of those things. I played other sports growing up. But when I started wrestling, I really fell in love with it. And I played football my freshman year of high school that fall. Coming in too. And then that was the last season I did, and I committed myself to wrestling full time. And partly the reason why I did that is because, wrestling, you get to choose your own destiny. My first match, I went out, I got pinned. And I don't know, that fired me up. I can't blame anybody else for that loss, right? The only person I can blame is myself. My coaches obviously prepared me and get me ready. But it was no one else that I can blame. So the desire to want to be a champion and want to be good or do great things inside of the sport led me to, just invest in full time into wrestling. And so I wrestled throughout high school, ended up having some success. I ended up being, county champion, regional champion. Then I ended up being in the state finals as a state finalist. And I didn't do that all until my senior year, right? And so trying to get looks at trying to, go to school. I didn't know where I was going to go to school at, right? I wanted to wrestle, but there was really, you can probably attest to the sport of wrestling, how hard it is to get to, college. I mean, from high school to college. On average, I think the status like 5% of athletes get to play their sport in college, and wrestling is less than 3%. And so there's a huge disparity in there. And so talking about Division I and the Big Ten, that was like really far-fetched. So but I continued to train. It was a big goal, but I wanted to obtain it. And so I ended up that summer. I guess backstory. So I was ended up trying to choose what school I wanted to go to, right? So I knew I wanted to wrestle. I was in the state of Maryland, so looking at the University of Maryland or looking at Morgan State. So Morgan State was the HBCU, but they didn't have wrestling. And so it was like one of those schools that I got accepted in, I could have went to, but then I fortunately got a scholarship to the University of Maryland, which was an academic scholarship, which allowed me to get to the University of Maryland. And so once I was on campus, I ended up walking onto the wrestling team. By my senior year, I was a team captain, won a Big Ten Medal of Honor. And then my last season, ended up becoming the national qualifier, but that was the COVID year. And so that ended up ending my career. So during that time, it was interesting because it was 2020. So it was a lot of things, racial injustices, happening and things like that. Well, it's always been happening, right? But I guess it was highlighted through the use of social media and COVID, right? Being at home, constantly on your phone. And so that time was rough. And then, my season ending like that, my career ending like that. It was a tough time for me. So I started to think about ways that I could be involved and really trying to help inside of the wrestling community. And so one of the first things that I did early on was I started doing Instagram lives with another wrestler from American University, and we started connecting and getting following, and that eventually ended up getting connected with the Black Wrestling Association, becoming an advisory board member, and now serving as on the executive board for the Black Wrestling Association. And through that, just trials and things like that, I ended up getting connected, and the idea of HBCU wrestling came about. And that was right around June 2020. Conversations started being had. It's like, okay, if we look at the HBCUs, there's over 100 in America. 0 of them have Division I wrestling. And so that's a problem, right? Because we understand what it means, but you also look at wrestling as in terms of the demographics of the types of people that actually end up in college. Wrestling ranks second amongst first generation college students. And so I think that's quite interesting because, I always think that football, basketball, those would be the number one, number two, but it's actually football, then wrestling, and then basketball. And that's across all NCAA divisions. So, not having those opportunities, we end up losing out on, potential leaders that have the potential to change society as a whole. So that's kind of just an overall, just general background. I know that was a lot, but I just kind of wanted to go through that because, when I think about my story, it all started by having high goals and high expectations, right? But then also being given opportunities. And there's kids out there that are very similar, but they just don't have the opportunity to be able to get highlighted on the biggest stage. So that's at the forefront of everything that we're doing and our why of, just being able to create the next generation of leaders.
Yeah, for sure. And you talked about it in your intro a little bit of when you were coming out of high school, your options were Morgan State and Maryland, where, you're from the state of Maryland. So you wanted to stay close to home and everything else. And Morgan State doesn't have wrestling. Right. And, that's something that a lot of Black wrestlers have to kind of endure. Right. Do I want to go to an HBCU or do I want to wrestle in college? Right. And, unfortunately, that is the decision that a lot of them have to make. But now, through HBCU Wrestling Initiative, that's starting to change. But talk about that kind of thought in your mind as a high school senior and how you came to the decision that you were going to go to Maryland and wrestle instead of going to an HBCU. And who did you have those conversations with to decide where you were going to go?
Right. And so for me, it all came back down to the affordability, right? How to actually go to school for free. And so I was very blessed, through God and, his work, as I was able to get an academic scholarship to go to the University of Maryland, and it's through a program called the Incentive Awards Program, which is focused on first generation college students that overcame adversity throughout their life, always had strong self-efficacy, and always had bigger purpose that they felt that they wanted to achieve. And so it covered tuition, room and boards, books, everything while I was there for 4 years. And so that program was the vehicle for me to even get into Maryland, because otherwise the affordability of college, it wouldn't have been, even accessible to me without taking out mountains and mountains of loans, right? And so I was blessed to be able to get that scholarship. So that kind of made the choice a lot easier for me, right? But for a lot of people, that's not the case. Otherwise, I probably would have went to Morgan State, a little bit more affordable, just in terms of my options. And so, fortunately, that happened. I ended up going to Maryland, and then that gave me the opportunity to walk onto the team. And so that was a process, right? Just getting on the team, and then just, getting buy-in from everyone else, because everyone else is on the team. They're like, they've been recruited, they've come from all over to come on the team, and they're looking at me and they not really understanding who I was. And so it was like, I kind of, at my time at Maryland, I kind of like was at the bottom of the totem pole, and I kind of raised my rankings throughout, and, earned the respect from my teammates. And it was like, we talk about all the time, because back then I used to skateboard and things like that. They had no clue who I was, and, just, how I just earned their respect over the years, and, and it was just through hard work, right? And that hard work was really instilled through me through my high school wrestling coaches, and making sure that I always give 100% effort, no excuses, right? Even if I'm feeling 80%, I still have to go 100% of 80, right? And just things like that. And so those lessons, I think, are very transferable into a lot of different things that I do now in my life. And, just trying to grow the sport overall in our community, I think, one of the missions that resonates deeply with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's always tough when you have to decide between schools, but fortunately for you, it was, the financial aspect was able to help you out. Now you're involved in HBCU Wrestling Initiative and BWA. We're both wearing the sweatshirts here, obviously supporting them tremendously. But kind of talk about, let's dig into how you got involved with HBCU Wrestling Initiative. Who gave you the call? Who kind of started to spearhead this and brought you on to be the executive director?
Yep. So the conversations happened, like I said, started in June 2020. And so at the time I was at Maryland, I had the opportunity to wrestle underneath Kerry McCoy for 4 years. And then my 5th year, I had wrestled underneath Alex Clemson. And so I was a part of the new regime at Maryland, and, and they're doing great right now. Go Turks. They're having a great season. So I'm looking forward to the postseason and just seeing the Turks. Shameless plug for the Turks. But
yeah, they've looked good. They've looked good this year.
Yeah, but so Kerry McCoy, he gave me a call, and once he gave me a call, he said, "Hey, start having conversations about this. We're looking to do. Would you be interested in doing this full time and spearheading this project?" And I'm like, "Of course, right? Like this, no questions. This is why I feel like I was put on this earth, right? I was put on this earth for a lot of other reasons, but, really to be able to leave a legacy and being able to inspire and help others. And, mixing wrestling with business, right? That's something that I've always done. And so, I was like, yes. So, he's like, all right, well, we started doing, formal conversations, brought me to the greater group with Mike Novogratz. So Mike Novogratz, he supports HBCU wrestling very generously, and is really, really one of our champions to get us going. And then in addition to, Mike, Nate Parker wrestled at Penn State, All-American. He's very instrumental as well, and is one of our founders. And so we started all having conversations, and they gave me the blessing to kind of just become the executive director and really spearhead this. And so I started formally a year later in June of 2021, and started having, really, deepening conversations with Morgan. We had a connection through Beat the Streets Baltimore because they were doing camps every summer. And within that time frame, ended up being able to get Morgan State, solidified within the 3-month span. And so we ended up, announcing a little bit later, but being able to do that was a big win, being from Maryland, understanding my own background, understanding that I solved the problem for my younger self. That was something that was, extremely important, and it means a lot to me.
Yeah. So once you start getting rolling, and you said it took a couple months, and Morgan State was the first school that was already on board, right? What kind of traction outside of that did you see, and what type of support did you guys see early on from people when you started telling them about this initiative? Were people on board with it immediately, or were people kind of slow to support it?
Yeah, no, it was people are really wanting to support, right? It's like and just figuring out ways to support, right? For some people that's, writing a check, right? And some people it might be their time, right? Or expertise or different things like that. And so it's, it looks different for everyone, but, for a lot of people, honestly, they're not even informed about it, right? They don't understand that this even is a problem that exists, right? Understanding when I say, there's over 100 HBCUs, 0 of them had Division I wrestling, they're like, really? And then they start trying to think well, I remember back in the day at my school, we used to have wrestling or something like that. And it's like, yeah, they all dropped, and here's the reasons why. And here's the reasons, here's the negative impacts that's coming out of that, right? I look at, I was at Howard. They inducted their 1995 team into the Hall of Fame. And, I was there, listening and just seeing some of the outcomes. I think on that team, about around 8 have advanced degrees, and they're doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, business people, right? And those are the types of outcomes that we're looking to promote, to be able to go back, right? And have, change inside of our communities. These are the people that's going to actually be there and be the wrestling coaches and help pull a kid out and, continue to push them forward. And so, success is kind of something that, it can be defined different ways. But for us, success isn't necessarily national championships, right? It's being able to just complete those degrees and start to have those impacts within the community. And so I know that's hard to say because we set that program up for tremendous success with getting a coach like Kenny Monday, right? He's, he's coming in to win, right? As, the first, Black Olympic gold medalist, right? He's used to knocking down doors and things like that. So it's just a tremendous time because we know that we're both going to get, quality athletes, but also give them the transformational experience that can later go on and, that they can change their communities. And for Morgan State, for us, we're looking at that as kind of the pilot program so that we can be able to scale across the other HBCUs as well. And so having conversations with other schools, that's Division I and making sure that you see how it will work for their school and trying to create a sustainability model so that they're not putting their institutions at risk by adding another, team, right? And so, some of the, the challenges that may come with that is, you talk about resources in terms of funds, and then we also talk about Title IX, right? And so we can get into that a little bit later, but, and for us, and I'll just say briefly, it's always been the goal of starting women's and men's teams, right? We're looking to fund equitably and making sure that we offer opportunities for both, right? Because it's these are going to be the leaders that really change our society, and we have the ability to mold that now.
Yeah. So talk about that process a little bit more of how did things come to fruition at Morgan State? What did those initial conversations look like, and how did they evolve as time passed to eventually get to the point where now, there is a coach in place. Kenny Monday is there. He's signing wrestlers that we're going to eventually see. I follow him on social media. You see the gear, you see the different things that are being put in place. So how did that, kind of give us a timeline of how it came from initial conversations to announcing not just a team, but an Olympic gold medalist and a coach?
Right. Yeah. So we announced the team. So that's, the restoration. That's when we were on the podcast together before. And then backtrack. So once I came on board, like I said, there was already, so Beat the Streets Baltimore, they do a STEM camp that's actually on Morgan State's campus every year. And so they were already on campus. So they had they had connection, within the athletic department. But more importantly, at the time, the athletic director, Dr. Ed Scott, he was at Binghamton, and they had a wrestling program. And so he was a part of that. So he was really familiar with the sport of wrestling and, the different things that come with it from the administration side. And so we all got onto a call early on, him, Lydell, Henry, and then at the time, one of their associate ADs, we got on a call, and we really just, went through and really hammered out what it would take for them, in terms of commitment. But more importantly, getting, information, and being able to partner with other, wrestling, D1 organizations to figure out what are sample budgets, right? What a budget looks like for a top tier or a mid tier or a low tier program, right? And being able to have information, regarding that, of how to set that up and, what it takes to start a program. And luckily, the NWCA, they have a lot of information about starting programs, being that they've gotten a lot of programs started in the past. So being able to leverage some key partnerships there, and working with them to be able to understand what that might look like for them. And then ultimately, we were able to come to terms of a way for it to work. Fundamentally, right? We were able to get a $3 million endowment established for that school. So they'll have money for wrestling in perpetuity, from the earnings from that endowment. And then over the next 10 years, the HBCU Wrestling will give additional commitment. And that's just to get the head coach. Well, I mean, not even just to get the head coach, but give the coach time to actually build out the program, the fundraising, right? Building out a team, right? That takes time. And, anything less than a 10-year runway, you start talking about 4-year cycles of, recruiting classes and things like that. You have to give them time to be able to get a set up for success. And so, for us, it was really important that we got the right coach. And so we worked with Morgan State to really identify, and it was a lot of tough, candidates that, put their name in the hat, for sure. It was like one of those things. I was like, wow, I wish I need to get more programs started because I didn't know we can get X, Y, and Z, right? And we that was a process, but ultimately, coach, he was the one, that ended up getting the position. And really, when he said he wanted to be a part of it, I mean, if he wanted to be a part of it, it's really an honor to have him. And so it was great to see that he put his name in the hat as well amongst another, a talented pool. And so, that's the route that we went. And, the background that he brings to the sport of wrestling, the knowledge and all the, the fundamentals, you couldn't script it better, right? If I was writing a movie, that's how it was scripted. And, this is life, and, history is being made right now. And, this, coming up in Tulsa, we'll get to celebrate a little bit at this NCAA tournament. Him being from Tulsa, the ties that it has on Black Wall Street, that all of that together. And then his son, had the opportunity to compete for a national title, that week. And so it all brings, into be a really special time for, coach and just being able to kick this off as the first program in a historic place.
Yeah. So you mentioned NWCA, and what type of support did you get? You mentioned obviously Novogratz and a lot of other people, but NWCA is a major player when it comes to college wrestling,
Yep.
especially at the Division I level. What type of support did NWCA give from the start that really helped get this thing going as well?
Yeah, so the NWCA, they've been, around since initial conversations. I meet with their executive director, often, as often as I need to, right? And so it may be a question that, hey, Mike, I need asking questions, right, about a certain thing, or asking how has this worked in the past? Well, what are areas that we need to be aware of? Thinking about just the rules, right? Recruiting, right? Things like that. Things that, is familiar with, right? Setting up how to recruit, right? The sales model and being able to follow up. Different things like that as a resource. They've been very supportive with that. And a lot of other things as well, right? Making the right connections within the wrestling community, right? I wrestle, but I don't necessarily know everyone in the wrestling community that supports, right? And so even though I have this mission, I might not know the next person that might want to support. And so making introductions and things like that, that's been really helpful as well, to making sure that I have the right resources when I'm approaching, and having conversations with the different schools, within our pipeline.
Yeah. So, are there any schools that we should be looking out for that are looking to add wrestling here in the future? Obviously we have Morgan State, and a lot of really great things are coming out of there. Have there been any other talks of any other schools that are ready to, not so much maybe not ready to go, but are really kind of far down this process and could possibly be looking to throw some singlets on?
Yeah, there are a few that we're in conversations with. I don't want to speak too fast, right?
Yeah.
Just in terms of what schools we might be coming out next. But we are in conversations and just trying to figure out, what that would look like for those particular institutions. And so, we have, just in general, right? Like, you look at the two conferences and you look at wrestling schools that had wrestling in the past. That's kind of how we design for our top schools. And so the top schools are really schools that, strong educationally, strong, history and things like that. And then also having a history of wrestling. That was important so that we can engage the alumni base. Those schools are like the Howards, the Hamptons, Norfolk State, I'm blanking, North Carolina A&T, FAMU. I should have said FAMU first. FAMU, because they the longest active, program. Well, because of the club status, but FAMU, highs on the list. And so there's a few other as well, that, we strongly like, to bring on board, as a program underneath in terms of partnerships. Delaware State's another school that, that we're very interested in. But it's just being able to work with the different, programs to see how that would actually work.
Yeah. Yeah. FAMU is a school. So I had a chance to go to club nationals. I want to say it was 2015 maybe. And it was in Dallas. So when I was living out in Austin, working with Flo, and I drove up to Dallas for club nationals. And while I was there, I met with the FAMU team, and the FAMU Coach Simmons is out there, and I met with them. So I've stayed in contact with them over the years, and I talk to them from time to time, so I know how eager they are to really get things going. And I probably even should have worn my FAMU wrestling T-shirt today instead, but they're definitely a school that I can say that I'm not surprised is on your radar, right? Yeah. They are really trying to get things working, and those coaches have, not just FAMU, but they have, they're not HBCUs, but they have Florida and Florida State all working together out there.
Right.
So, getting Division I wrestling, not just in Florida, but having it be an HBCU would be huge, right? So
Right.
I'm sure that they're on your radar, and that's definitely a school that you guys would love to announce them. But, moving forward, what's kind of the criteria for you guys when you are looking at these schools? You mentioned the academic side of things, but when you're picking what schools you guys want to start to get these into, is there kind of a checklist that you're looking to kind of look at?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the first thing is having the buy-in from the school, right? Like, it's not something that, necessarily they want to get involved, but they want us to foot the bill, right, for the entire program, right? Because without the right buy-in, you don't really even set the program up for success in the long term. So we like to call it some type of skin in the game, right? And Morgan State, they put a lot of skin in the game. Just in terms of getting the program set up, matching us on an endowment, right? But every school is not in that position to do that. And so we understand that. But at the bare minimum, have some type of skin in the game. But on top of that, being able to commit to that, like a 10-year runway. And so part of that skin in the game is being able to commit to, being able to have the program for at least a period of 10 years. And that's really, as I mentioned before, to give the coaches, time to have some type of success, right? The third thing is, salary requirements. We want to make sure that coaches aren't, and especially the top coaches, aren't taking necessary salary cuts to be able to pursue opportunities by coaching at HBCUs. And so, being able to offer competitive salaries based off of the market and, the conference that they may compete in, right? Those are things that's really important to us to make sure that not only we're creating opportunities for the athletes, but also making sure our Black coaches, right, or whatever coaches at these schools, they have the right resources to actually be able to go to the program and lead the program in the right way and build leaders. And so those are I guess some of the big ones, right? Like if we can get through that, then we can pretty much start to figure out ways to get the program started. This is also another criteria. And this is, I guess, equally as important is that if they choose to add a women's team, that they have a coach dedicated purely just to the women's wrestling program. Right. So you don't get into a conversation where you got a coach trying to build the men's program and they have a women's team, but they have a bigger focus on the men's team, or they might have a bigger focus on the women's team. Right. We understand that there are two uniquely different models, right? And how they're, even compete, on the Division I level, right? Women's wrestling emerging sports. So, just those types of understandings and, figuring that out. But those are some of the main questions that we ask and try to figure out, early on so that we can begin to mold and create what a sample budget might look like or what are the ways for sustainability.
Yeah. So one of the things that has kind of plagued the wrestling community lately is seeing programs cut, right? So Fresno State was one of those programs that they used to have. They brought it back, and then I believe a couple of years later they're cutting it again. Yeah. And same thing with Stanford. Stanford was almost cut, but then there was a huge push and a huge fight, and they kept it. But we've seen other programs, Old Dominion, cutting wrestling.
Yeah.
What have you guys taken from these schools that have taken wrestling out of their curriculum and out of their budgets, right? What have you learned from these other schools where they're saying, okay, we can't have wrestling anymore, that you guys have taken and learned from it and said, okay, this is something we have to look out for?
Right. And so that's a great question. And I think that was one of the questions that one of the areas that we focused heavy on early on. And it really comes down to the agreements and the partnerships, right? And what's inside of those partnerships, right? Being able to set up separate funds for wrestling and the way that it operates, that it really becomes self-sufficient in a way. And so having an endowment established is for wrestling only in perpetuity, right? And other schools have endowments. That's not something, special, particular to, Morgan State or any other program that's started in the past. But that's ways that they can kind of alleviate that pain. So we worked and tried to have conversations early on to try to figure that out. But ultimately, is really in the agreements that we established to make sure that, and early on planning to make sure that things are in place so that we don't necessarily get to that. But again, it's a risk factor, and you can't eliminate out risk completely. I mean, as much business as you want as a business person, right? To eliminate out risk, you can't, right? But you can try to mitigate it as much as possible by putting the right things in place, and then ultimately being able to keep to make sure that the programs are everlasting.
Yeah. So, behind HBCU Wrestling, and you mentioned some of the people, Nate Parker, Novogratz, you have an all-star cast, right? And these guys have been in some of the cream of the crop meetings and have competed at the highest level with Kerry McCoy and Kenny Monday, and then you also have, Tony Dungy in there as well. How did this all-star cast come together behind the HBCU Wrestling Initiative?
Yeah. So, and all of them, I mean, like Mike, Nate Parker, really early on, they were part of the early on conversations, right? So this is, really early on with Kerry McCoy. Those all happened in the early stages, in June of 2020. And then, being able to get Coach Dungy involved, that was also through, the wrestling community, right? Being able to get connected with one of his former chaplains, who's a wrestler, was chaplain at the Minnesota Vikings, and ultimately being able to make the connection with, Coach Dungy. And Coach Dungy is an all-star. I mean, he's just a great human being, right? So having conversations with him and I, we were able to connect on a deeper level, and spiritually, him and I for, right until the end of, football season got into the weeds of things. We were able to do morning prayers with each other every other Tuesday. So every 2 weeks we were on the phone, on the phone doing morning prayers together, on the Zoom. And, it was great to be able to have that type of connection with Coach and all the things that he's accomplished, and understanding how his faith has always been at the root, to his successes. And, for me, in a way, for my success, I'm trying to get these programs started. So like as a wrestler, right, we got Morgan State started, but that's my hand raised. That was yesterday, right? So who do I get to tomorrow? And those are like the transferable skills that I mentioned earlier that I feel transfer over. But, Coach, he's, walked through and for him, he's looking to get other people involved, within the NFL community, to continue to make sure that we have the right resources and push former players, things like that, that he's had the opportunity to coach. He wants to get them involved as well. And so he's been making connections. And I'm actually flying out to Olympic Training Center next month to meet with him again in person. And so we'll have, as a follow-up, meeting to talk more.
Yeah. So what are some of these, as we kind of round things down here, what are some of the things that we should be looking out for coming from HBCU Wrestling Initiative? I think I talked to Kenny and he said there's something you guys are having out in Tulsa, and I'll be out in Tulsa, so hopefully I can make it over there. But what are some of these things that people should look out for that are going to be coming from HBCU Wrestling Initiative?
Yeah. So just in the short term, so we'll have, as Coach mentioned to you, we'll have the event in Tulsa. It'll be at the Greenwood Cultural Center, so that'll be on March 15th, and it'll start at 6. And that's more so like a meet and greet, and just having hors d'oeuvres, cocktails type vibe, just being all in the same room, right? It's really the first time that we're all under the same room, after this big announcement, and so that'll be a great time, and then that'll happen at the NCAA weekend, and then we'll also have a breakfast on the Sunday after NCAA's Breakfast of Champions, and so that'll be something that again people can get that's still in town to get be a part of. But just in general, going forward, we're going to be kicking off and continue to have different marketing and campaigns to continue to get the mission out there as much as possible. So being able to have people support via communication channels and continuing to help us reach our fundraising goal. We have a lofty fundraising goal of $18 million to be able to get these programs there, and we're, more than halfway with just commitments from, that we already have in the door at around $10 million. So we're, almost there, right? So we just need to continue to get the support to be able to get there. And so there could be, $20 reoccurring subscriptions or, $5 reoccurring subscriptions, right? Every bit counts for us to, get there and to get to that bigger goal and really to create this sustainability for these programs. And so, there'll be more information released on that, soon, and continue to be pushed there. And then I guess the last thing I would say is we'll, eventually start in the future, look to try to do events, fundraising events, in time for us to get together. The first match will be, sometime in the fall. So that's something that we should all get around and, make a big splash for. But those are some of the things in side short term, but we'll definitely release and make sure that we keep people updated about things to come in the future.
Yeah. So Jahi, I'm going to let you go, but before we end today's conversation, I want you to kind of let everybody know, where they can find you guys on social media, if there's a website, how they can donate, how they can get involved. So the floor is yours. Kind of let people know where they can find HBCU Wrestling.
Yeah, so you can find HBCU Wrestling on all socials at HBCU Wrestling. And you can find us on our website. Our website is hbcuwrestling.org. If you would like to support, and we'll appreciate all support, you'll go to hbcuwrestling.org/donate. And on that page, you can set up, as I mentioned before, recurring donations, or you can give a one-time donation. So the floor is yours on how you'd like to support. But then also, you can also sign up on the website. You can have a contact form. And if you fill out the contact form, we'll get back to you and figure out ways that we can get you involved, and just the overall initiative and making sure that we continue to push this forward.
Yeah, that's great. That is awesome, Jahi. I really appreciate you joining me today. Hopefully I'll have a chance to see you out there in Tulsa. I get out there on the 15th. So okay. I'll try and stop over and see you guys while I'm out there. But man, this has been great. I'm happy to see that things are progressing as well as they are. And, like I said, I get a chance to chop it up with Coach Monday every once in a while when I'm out there in Princeton calling those matches. And, he said he's got some hammers that are coming in and he's signing some guys. So can't wait to see that first match in the fall. But, man, this has been great, Jahi. You got anything else for us before we let you go?
No, I appreciate you for having me. I know you said you saved me for the last, so I hope I lived up to the high expectations of the best, one of the best. So, but yeah, just appreciate your support. Just even early on with getting this as an outlet to get our news out, and just even continue to want to follow up about our progress, and really document our story.
Man, Jahi, this has been great. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Athletes to Athletes podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. To engage with everything the A2A platform has to offer, go to the App Store and search Athletes to Athletes to download our new app. You can check out our educational material, and you'll ensure that you don't miss when a new episode of the A2A podcast drops. Again, thank you for listening. We'll see you again next time.